Okay, let's go ahead and get started on a chemistry review. Sorry, I sound like I'm in a bubble here in this room. But it was the only private room that I could find. So this is going to be a quick one through because this is all stuff as review from physical science. So let's go and talk about the atom, okay? The atom you learned last year is the basic unit of matter. It's the smallest particle that we know of at this point. And that if you have a bunch of atoms that come together, they make up what we call the element, and that's all the elements from the periodic table, right? Okay, so that's old news. Next, what are the subatomic particles that make up an atom? Well, you know you have a nucleus, and that's the center of the atom, and inside the nucleus, you know you have protons and neutrons, and that makes up your atomic number. Then you have these rings that are around the nucleus, which are, you can call them energy levels, you can call them orbitals, you can call them rings, lots of different terminology for them, but they contain the electrons, which is the negatively charged particle. I think I must have missed protons, positive particle, neutrons, neutral, right? No charge. And the outermost energy is what we call our valence electron. So it's how many electrons are in the outermost energy level that are the valence electrons, and that amount of electrons determines bonding, which we'll also get into in this video. All right. Next thing is about the difference between what makes up a compound. Well, when two or more atoms come together, they bond together, that makes up what we call either a compound or a molecule. There's a real slight difference between a compound and a molecule, but molecules like water here typically have a covalent bond and a certain shape to them. Carbon dioxide, however, being a molecule with covalent bonds also. Terminology-wise, think of sodium chloride, NaCl. That is going to have an ionic bond, and so it would be considered a compound. Water and carbon dioxide, typically with covalent bonds, are more called molecules. It's a molecule of water or a molecule of carbon dioxide. So that's kind of the big deciding factor. I mean, there's more to it than that, and you'll learn about that in chemistry, but that's the general gist of the difference between a molecule and a compound is basically bonding and whatnot. Okay, so atoms that are bonded together, or atoms come together to make up elements, elements come together to make up compounds and molecules. There are two types of bonds, which we talked about in physical science. The ionic bond, which I always termed the bully bond, because one atom typically would take the electrons from another, or reverse my cursor here, one atom would take electrons from another atom. And so it's going to have charges. It's going to have your positive ion and your negative ion, and you probably remember making those compounds with the pluses and the minuses and so forth. That's what ionic bonding is all about. Okay, so a positive one would bond with a positive negative to give it a neutralization, and that's how they would bond together. You'd have to have a positive 2 with a negative 2 in order to make that go together. And that's where you get those subscripts, if you remember putting subscripts into compound formulas. Like H2O, oxygen has, it's got a positive or a -2 oxidation number, so it's going to take two hydrogens, which both have +1 oxidation numbers, in order to neutralize it to become H2O. Okay. Another one is talking about water. Water's unique because it is a polar molecule, which means that there's a slight charge to it, which is why it conducts electricity. You might have done the salt water conducting electricity in your physical properties lab, and you saw that the salt water would actually conduct electricity better than regular water. But you know that if you stand in water with electricity in your hands, you're going to get a shock because it'll conduct the electricity. All right. We also know that there are nonpolar molecules, and they do not have any charged regions on them. Okay. Hydrogen bonds is a unique type of bond that maybe you touched on in physical science. They form between slightly positive hydrogen ions and slightly negative ions, like water here. Okay, but that's a unique situation. It's called the hydrogen bond. So basically, by the time you finish this, you're going to know ionic and covalent bonds, because you learned about those in physical science. Now you just kind of did a touching on a hydrogen bond, which is, hydrogen bonded to any other atom out there. And we also talked about a peptide bond during our amino acids when we're looking at how monomers bond together to build the polymer of a protein. That's a peptide bond. So you're getting more familiar with different kinds of bonds. Okay, so that's it. That's where I want to stop for right now, and we'll talk more about water in the next video. So have a nice evening, and we'll take a quiz on that tomorrow.